Welcome to my operations management video on the management of quality. This will be a look at the qualitative side of quality. That is, there are no calculations here. We'll get to those later. Quality is the ability of a product or service to consistently meet or exceed customer expectations. Prior to the 1970s and the increase in Japanese competition, quality was not really much of an issue. At the time, most American cars rarely went over 100,000 miles. In fact, the first 2 cars I owned only had a 5-digit odometer. Japanese cars had higher quality, lasted for a lot longer, and this allowed Japanese companies to capture a large market share in this country. It also kind of woke up the American car manufacturers to the need for higher quality. Quality management started in 1924 with statistical process control charts, and we will look at those in a later video. 1930 saw tables for acceptance sampling. The 1940s saw statistical sampling techniques, and we will talk about those in a later video. The 1950s saw quality assurance, also known as TQC or total quality control. That would evolve into total quality management, TQM. We have a video on that. The 1960s saw us attempting to have 0 defects. The 1970s brought quality assurance into services. Before that, it had been strictly in manufacturing. The 1980s saw an actual total quality management, which evolved from total quality control. The 1990s saw ISO 9000, lean manufacturing, and Six Sigma. I'm going to briefly introduce some of the key contributors to quality management. And just a heads up, I'm terrible with names. I'm likely to mispronounce several of these names. Schuhart developed control charts and variance reduction. That is production variance, not statistical variance. Deming is probably the most famous of all of the quality control gurus. In fact, he has a Japanese prize named after him. That comes up in a separate video. He's most well known for his 14 points, but also for his differentiation between special and common causes of variation. Huron developed the idea that quality is fitness for use. He also developed the idea of a quality trilogy. Fitzenbaum developed the idea that the customer defines quality, one of the key components of quality control. He also defined quality as a total field. Crosby developed the idea that quality is free. It may cost you more to have 0 defects, but you save it on scrap rates and extra production. Ishihawa developed the cause and effect diagrams that we talk about in another video. He also developed quality circles. They were popular in the United States in, I believe, the 1980s. Tagachi developed the Tagachi loss function. Ono and Shingo developed the idea of continuous improvement, one of the real cornerstones of quality control. Now let's define some terms for product quality. Performance is the main characteristic of the product or service. This is how well your car drives, how well your computer computes. Aesthetics are the appearance, feel, smell, taste. Oftentimes, consumers define quality based on appearance. Special features are extra characteristics that your product has that tries to raise it above the competition. Conformance is how well your product or service conforms to customer expectations. Does it do what the customer expects it to do? Reliability is consistency of performance, and I have an entire video on reliability. Durability is the useful life of the product or service. Perceived quality is an indirect evaluation of quality. It's based on reputation. So a car company like BMW, for example, has very high perceived quality. Serviceability is service after the sale if that's applicable, and it isn't for many products. Some of the determinants of product quality are as follows. The design. The intention of designers to include or exclude features in a product or service. In other words, did the designers design a product or a service that consumers want to buy? Conformance. The degrees to which goods or services conform to the intent of the designer. Ease of use, and where applicable, user instructions. These increase the likelihood that a product will be used for its intended purpose and in such a way that it will continue to function properly and safely. Service. Taking care of issues and problems that arise after the sale to the extent that's applicable. While some of the dimensions of product quality also apply to service quality, let's talk about some of the dimensions of service quality specifically. Convenience, the availability and accessibility of the service, and this is relative to the service. A consumer might not think that a 10-mile drive to a McDonald's, for example, is convenient. On the other hand, they might think that a 15 or 20-mile drive to a specialist doctor is very convenient. Reliability, the ability to perform a service dependably, consistently, and accurately. For example, there's a Wendy's near my house. When you go through the drive-thru, you pull around the building after you've gotten your order and you have to check it because they consistently make mistakes, so they're not very reliable. Responsiveness, willing to help customers in unusual situations and to deal with problems. What do you do when a server messes up the order? What do you do when a barber gives a poor haircut? Time, the speed in which the service is delivered. Again, this is very relative to the service. Waiting an hour at McDonald's would be unacceptable. Waiting for an hour at a specialist doctor would be very acceptable. Courtesy, the way customers are treated by employees. The more general the service, the more important this is. The more specialized the service, the less important this is, although it's not unimportant. You're more concerned about courtesy at the McDonald's than you are at the specialist doctor, for example. Tangibles, and here we're not talking about the tangible items that you might get from a service like the hamburgers at McDonald's. Here we're talking about the physical appearance of facilities, equipment, personnel, and communications material. In other words, does the building and all of the accoutrements of the building look appropriate for that service? And again, we have a different expectation for a McDonald's than we would for a doctor's office. Consistency, the ability to provide the same level of good service repeatedly. Obviously, this is much more important to a service that consumers use it over and over again than, say, a specialist doctor where you may only go once or twice. Services have some very special and unique challenges for quality. Customer expectations often change. Different customers have different expectations. I've talked about this in another video, but think about it. If you're in a foul mood and you go into a McDonald's, there's probably nothing that they can do to make you happy with that service. Your mood is going to spoil any service you receive. If you're in a great mood, there's probably not much that a McDonald's can do to mess up your service. Even if they make mistakes, you're in such a great mood, it's not going to bother you. Each customer contact is a moment of truth. In other words, every time a service deals with a customer, it's an opportunity to make a great impression or a bad impression. And no matter how many times that customer has come into your business, you have that moment of truth every single time they come in. Customer participation can affect perception of quality. Some businesses don't have a lot of customer participation. At a McDonald's, you just order your meal and wait for them to give it to you. At a buffet, you fix your salad, you fix your plate, you get your food yourself, so there's a lot more participation. Fail-safing must be designed into the system. Fail-safing is a way of keeping from making a mistake. For example, there's a Six Flags amusement park not far from where I live. Some of the rides have a minimum height requirement. If you try to ride the ride and you're too short, when you get up to get on the ride, they'll hold a bar behind you with a white stripe on it. You have to be above that white stripe in order to be tall enough to ride the ride. This is not to be mean to shorter people. It's that the restraints on the ride are designed for a certain height. If you're too small, the restraints might not hold you, and that could lead to a disaster. So this is a way of keeping the ride operator from making a mistake and allowing the wrong person on the ride. So what are the benefits of good quality? Well, you can get a great reputation if you have good quality. Think about Honda and Toyota. You can charge premium prices if you have high quality. Think about Lexus. You can increase your market share. More people want to buy your product or your service. You have greater customer loyalty. And that's great, especially if you have repeat customers. The more loyal a customer is, the more likely they are to overlook a mistake in one of those moments of truth. You have lower liability costs because your product is less likely to have a defect that causes a problem. Fewer production or service problems. This gives you higher productivity. We talked about productivity in a prior video. That's useful outputs divided by inputs. Higher quality increases the useful outputs of the part of the fraction without changing the bottom of the fraction, the inputs. Lower production costs because you have fewer rejects. And higher profits, again, because you have fewer rejects. So what are the consequences of poor quality? Basically the flip side of the benefits. If your quality is poor enough, you can go out of business. But even if it's not that poor, you can lose business. Think about the times you've gone to a restaurant that did a poor job. Were you in a big hurry to go back? Probably not. In fact, I've been to a few restaurants where the service or food was so poor I never went back. If your poor quality caused problems, you can have liability issues. If it's a product, you can have product recalls. You have lower productivity because you have fewer useful outputs with the same inputs. And you have higher costs. So who's responsible for quality? The short answer is everyone, but especially top management. Top management has to set the tone of the organization, and it has to be a tone that values quality. Beyond that, of course, design. You've got to design quality products or service. Procurement. You've got to buy the right inputs to make the quality product or service. And if it's manufactured in this country, about 60% of the cost of goods sold is purchased parts, and that goes through procurement. Your production department, your operations department has got to produce high quality. Your quality assurance department, that's the inspectors, have to make sure that what you're shipping is a quality product or service. Packaging and shipping has to do a good job of shipping it out to the customer. My wife just got a shipment today from an online vendor. The product she got was probably great, we don't know yet, but the packaging was terrible. She's very upset about the packaging. Marketing and sales, and this is particularly important because remember, quality is in the eye of the customer, and marketing helps set those expectations. And there's got to be great customer service, especially when there's a problem. Now let's define some cost associated with quality. Failure cost. This is a cost incurred by defective parts, products, or faulty services. I have a fairly new Honda. While it was still under warranty, the battery failed. Had to take it to the Honda dealer. They put a new battery in. Didn't cost me anything. To Honda, that was a failure cost. An internal failure are costs incurred to fix the problems that are detected before the product or service is delivered to the customer. The inspector on the production line finds a problem. You pull it out and fix it. That's an internal failure. External failure. That's all costs incurred to fix the problems that are detected after the product or service is delivered to the customer. That's replacing my battery. Because it happens off-site and affects the customer's perception of quality, external failures are always a bigger deal than internal failures. Appraisal costs are the cost of activities designed to ensure quality or uncover defects. This is your quality control department. This is your inspection. Prevention costs are all the costs that you incur to prevent defects from occurring. This includes training, planning, customer assessment, process control, and quality improvement. Poor quality has the potential to be unethical. It's unethical to deliver substandard work, defective products, substandard service, poor designs, shoddy workmanship, substandard parts and materials, or even knowing about any of this stuff and not correcting it in a timely manner. There are special issues involved with quality when you're offshoring. And remember, outsourcing is just having another company do it for you. Offshoring is having the work done overseas. You want to source from reputable, well-established companies, and that can be hard to determine in another country, especially one where you don't speak the language. 2. So one of the things you need to do is conduct comprehensive background checks on the companies you're thinking about doing business with. 3. You want to implement site inspections. You want to make sure that the companies you hire overseas to build your product are behaving ethically, treating their workers fairly, paying workers fairly, having safe working conditions, and all the things you hear on the news about. 4. You want to conduct ongoing performance reviews of supply chain partners. You need to be able to weed out poor performers or suppliers who are behaving unethically. And you only want to source from companies that provide a written guarantee. But remember, a written guarantee is only as good as the courts in the country you're offshoring to. If they're strongly biased against foreign companies, your written guarantee may not be worth much. 6. You want to be cautious about buying from companies that do not have franchised relationships with distribution partners. This is one way they show that they're a solid company and not a fly-by-night company. It shows that other companies are willing to do business with them. Number 7, beware of unusually low pricing. You get what you pay for. You don't get what you don't pay for. 8, look for some kind of external certification by an organization that does certification, such as ISO. That gives you more assurances that you're dealing with a reputable company that knows how to produce quality products. 9, establish relationships with third-party organizations so they can give you the heads up of the good companies and the bad companies to deal with. 10, translate quality into measurable and clearly defined targets so both you and your supplier will know if they're meeting their standards or not. Now let's talk for a while about Six Sigma. Six Sigma is a business process for improving quality, reducing cost, and increasing customer satisfaction. Remember, Sigma is the statistical term for a standard deviation. A 99% confidence interval is 3 standard deviations on each side. So we're talking about 6 standard deviations on each side as opposed to 3. Statistically, that works out to having no more than 3.4 defects per million. The math is a little more complicated than what you did in your business stat class because the assumption is that there's going to be some drift in the mean. Conceptually, what this amounts to is programs designed to reduce defects. Using Six Sigma requires the use of certain quality control tools that we'll talk about in a separate video. Lean Six Sigma is a balanced approach to process improvement that integrates principles from lean operations and statistical tools for variance reduction from Six Sigma to achieve speed and quality. Basically, you're trying to achieve high quality while doing more with less. Lean Six Sigma applies equally well to services and manufacturing. It's been used at General Electric and Caterpillar Finance. Regular and Lean Six Sigma programs improve quality. That's what they're designed to do. They save time by reducing the number of defects, and they cut costs. again, by reducing the number of defects. Six Sigma management is about providing strong leadership. That is the single most important part of it. But it's also about defining performance metrics, things that can be measured and checked against. The thinking is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. When you're undergoing a Six Sigma program, you want to select projects that are likely to succeed, select the appropriate people, and give them good training in Six Sigma. Part of Six Sigma is solving quality problems. So let's talk about the general steps to problem solving. You've talked about this in other courses, so this is just a quick review. Number one, define the problem and establish an improvement goal. For example, you want to increase productivity by 12%. 2, define measures and collect data. These measures give you a baseline. Again, you can't manage it if you can't measure it, and before we know how much we improve, we got to know what the current situation is. 3, analyze the problem. Your productivity is low. What could be causing it? 4, generate potential solutions. These are sometimes called scenarios, but how are you going to resolve your low productivity problem? 5, choose one of those solutions. 6, implement it. 7, monitor the solution to see if it accomplishes the goal. If it doesn't, you need to revisit the problem, perhaps pick a different scenario, try to solve it again. This process is known as the PDSA cycle, the plan, do, study, act cycle. In planning, you recognize the problem, you form teams to improve the quality, you define the problem more specifically, you develop performance measurements like we talked about, you analyze the problem, you determine possible causes. In the do phase, you implement a solution. In the study phase, you evaluate the solution and you ensure performance. And then basically you start it over again in the act phase. This is continuous improvement. Part of the process of generating potential solutions is generating new ideas. Let's talk about some ideas for doing that. Brainstorming is certainly the most common of these, and it's certainly one you've talked about in other classes. It's a technique for generating a free flow of ideas in a group of people. Basically, you sit around a table, throw out ideas. Nobody's allowed to critique other ideas at this point, and anything goes, even wild ideas. An affinity diagram is a tool to organize data into logical categories. This oftentimes comes after brainstorming. It's common to write down the ideas generated in brainstorming on sticky notes and then try to group those sticky notes on a whiteboard into meaningful categories. Quality circles, I mentioned this briefly in another video. That's groups of workers who meet to discuss ways of improving products or processes. That's the products or processes that they work on. So you're asking the workers for ideas on how to improve how they do their job. This was really popular in the 1980s. Interviewing is a technique for identifying problems and collecting information. This is basically where a quality guru goes around and talks to the workers. What do you think's going on? What should we do to improve it? How would you handle it? Benchmarking, and I talked about this in another video as well. That's measuring performance against the best in the same or another industry. Well, it's pretty easy to see how you would measure yourself against someone else in the same industry. How would you do that with another industry? Does that even make sense? Well, think about a hospital that wanted to improve their check-in procedures. Rather than looking at another hospital who might not do it any better than they do, they might look at a hotel, like a Hyatt. Are there things that Hyatt does when they check in their guests that the hospital could use to improve their check-in procedures? That's benchmarking. 5W2H. This is a silly name. This is a method of asking questions about a process that includes what, why, where, when, who, how, and how much. I mentioned benchmarking earlier. It's just a way of formalizing that. This comes from the 5 W's that you're taught in as a reporter: who, what, when, where, why. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and consider subscribing to this channel.